Welcome to Book Talk with Jordan and Stefan. This month we are taking a look at a true classic of science fiction, that being Neuromancer by William Gibson. And to give you just a vague idea of the importance of William Gibson's writing, which kind of burst onto the scene with Neuromancer, his initial splash after having published a number of short stories, which ultimately became Burning Chrome. Without William Gibson, we would not have The Matrix. We would not have Akira. We would not have Ghost in the Shell. We would not have cyberpunk as a genre. And William Gibson was the creator, the fountainhead for the whole idea of putting punk on the end of things, cyberpunk. He and Bruce Sterling together actually created the steampunk genre with, a lot of people think it was K.W. Jeter that created steampunk. It was William Gibson and Bruce Sterling with the difference engine. And so a true revolutionary, a true iconoclast in the realm of science fiction. And it's difficult to imagine. I mean, this book came out in 1984. I was born in 1983. So I can appreciate watching the entire, or watching the common man, the common woman discover the internet and cyberspace and all of that for the first time. And there was this, there was this feeling, especially in like the early to mid 90s, like it was like the Chicago World's Fair, where there's just this buzz in the air of the world of tomorrow and all of that, and you really feel like you're moving forward. Of course, now you flash forward 20 years, and we're all just, using the internet as an opportunity to say everything we would like to say if we couldn't get punched in real life. And what William Gibson did, what he saw coming, was a world where, remember at the time, just owning a computer when this book was written, just owning a computer pigeonholed you as a nerd and an egghead and just the ultimate in uncool. And Gibson saw where everything was going, and he said, no, we're going to paint a world where the computer hackers and the programmers and the techies, they are the cool kids. They are the ones who are, they are being sought after the same way high-end drug dealers are being sought after. And so, he created this world, and hence the name cyberpunk. And it has been, it was a watershed moment for science fiction. And probably the most significant step forward in the development of science fiction since the new wave of science fiction that was spearheaded by Harlan Ellison, Philip K. Dick, and a number of others in that vein, Robert Heinlein and that sort of thing. So, very, very important author. That said, as we were going into it, I have read this book like 3 or 4 times, and Stefan was coming to it for the very first time. And so one of the things one of the big stumbling blocks was, and this was interesting for me, it was curious to me because, when I read this book originally, I already knew enough about William Gibson's terminology and his phrasing and everything to be able to follow what was going on. Even then, it's very dense writing. It can be very hard to follow, and you have to repeat a lot of passages and that kind of thing. And the tone, the ideas, it can be very convoluted. And that was, I don't want to put words in your mouth, Stefan. Lay it on me what you were thinking.
I think Gibson's a brilliant guy, and I don't think he knows how to write. There's something that it just did not work. It's as if he had all these great ideas and he had to get them out, and he didn't get them out in an appropriate way that it was digestible or consumable for the average reader, or even a reader of science fiction to properly understand, because he's missing. There are gaps, creative writing craft gaps, like scene breaks, or scenario breaks, or even basic descriptions that just aren't there. That you actually forget who characters are, or some characters sound very similar to others, or characters have the ability to do things that are so fantastical, and you're not sure if it's the real world, if it's in the Matrix world, if it's a dream world, if it's a drug-induced world. You have to tell the audience this is what's happening, and then you can go crazy with with the action. So this would work fantastically well if it was if this was rewritten as a screenplay and then made into a series of TV shows, or a miniseries. That would be great, because then you could visualize all these ideas, or at least fill in the gaps between scenes, so you have some idea of what is going on, or basically where you are, first of all, and who's doing what and who's seeing what. Like I remember sending you a paragraph, which ironically has to do with how one of the main characters ends up surviving in a further scene, that everything is wrong with each sentence in the paragraph. And we even talked about it, but it was like, that's the kind of the fundamental problems with his diction, that all you would give him 20-minute lesson on how to write. Say, okay, listen, dude, when you have a scene, describe what's going on from a perspective that someone who doesn't know you can understand you. That's all you have to do.
Yeah. Well, I mean, you're right, and it's frustrating, because knowing what's the larger scope of what's going on here, his ideas are absolutely fascinating. And I will say, as someone who's read a lot of his work, it becomes much, much more clear as he goes. Like any writer, he develops over time. So you get, the Sprawl trilogy, which Neuromancer is the first book in the Sprawl trilogy, is very dense writing, and I don't totally get it, but he's unwilling to stop and explain what's going on. So if you don't know, for example, what slotting a deck means, then you're lost. And slotting a deck means you're plugging into an interface for logging onto the Matrix, the internet, cyberspace.
I would say the verbs actually aren't the main problem. It's the nouns and the things he creates, and the terms. Like, I was hoping there was a glossary at the end of the book saying, what are these things? Because I still don't know what half this stuff is, or what the names mean. Like, I think that one of the names was the Finn, and I was like, is it Finn or the Finn? And then I got that confused with another character, and I didn't know who is who, and then we jump into the Matrix. I don't know when we got into the Matrix. And it's just this confusing mess of disconnected ideas.
Yeah, it's and the idea, what's actually going on in Neuromancer. Modest spoiler alert. But what's actually going on is you have this character named Case, and he is a data cowboy. Basically like a mercenary computer hacker. And he tried, the backstory is that he tried to screw over his employers, and they said, all right, well, we're going to, as payback, we're going to cripple your brain in such a way that you can't log on to the internet anymore, and you can't, do your job. So he's out of work, and so he's trying to find somebody who can reverse the process and make it to where he can work again. He's ultimately contacted by a guy named Armitage, who sets him up so that he can work again in exchange for being a part of this team of computer hackers and mercenaries and thieves and other assorted lowlifes that Armitage is putting together. And what's ultimately happening is that there are two AIs, two artificial intelligences called Wintermute and Neuromancer, that are they're not fully functional AIs. They can't pass the Turing test, but they are functional enough that they know about each other and they can exchange information, but they aren't actually linked up in such a way that they can function as an artificial intelligence. It's basically a right brain and a left brain. And there's a law in place that says that you are not, if you are, that creators of artificial intelligence are not allowed to create a fully functioning artificial intelligence, that there has to be a barrier to how it can function so it doesn't, go, do the Skynet thing and take over the world or something like that. And as it turns out, what we ultimately find out is the Wintermute AI is actually the one that has hired all of these people, and it's trying to get all of these data couriers, and it's trying, when the Wintermute AI is trying to get all of these different people to come together to break down the barrier between it and Neuromancer so that they can unify and become the first fully functioning fully sentient AI. And that's the idea. That's the setup for the story. And there are a lot of really cool ideas in there, like you said, that all of this, the people who create, the people behind Wintermute are a business family called the Tessier Ashpools, which are, it's kind of like Wayland Yutani in the Alien universe, where it's like, the corrupt family dynasty corporation and everything. And these people they're a wealthy, 1% corporation, kind of Trump family type corporation. And they spend most of their time in cryogenic stasis on the moon, and that's what's so fascinating to me. Like they are so wealthy that they only ever come out of stasis if they have to deal with some business, issue or something, and then they go right back in. And it's just which is just fascinating to me. And I assume they're jacked into some kind of virtual reality or something while that's going on. And it's and so it is a really phenomenally cool idea, and you're right, just the writing is so dense and so convoluted. And you have to remember, Gibson was coming less from a science fiction background and more from a beatnik background, so there is a huge element of Kerouac and Burroughs and all of the and Thomas Pynchon, and that kind of thing. And, he is very, very directly compared to those writers. Yeah, like, I just pulled up, looking in my copy of the book, which, incidentally, I have an autographed copy, but, which is totally cool. But Timothy Leary writes this blurb for the jacket copy. He says, "Neuromancer is the best book I've read since Gravity's Rainbow. Its fast pace and style are outstanding." And, if you know Thomas Pynchon's writing, he is a similar author where it's just flying by in these dizzying blurs of words, and you're like, what in the hell is going on, And then there's, William S. Burroughs says, "William Gibson's Neuromancer is about many of the ideas that I've been writing about for years." Excellent. So that's the tradition he's coming from. It's this kind of words as art, or sentence structure as performance art kind of thing, where it's like if you think about it this way, it's almost like a jazz solo, where instead of just playing the melody, you're playing, instead of just playing the melody, you are playing an improvisation on the melody, where you're developing the idea as much as you can, and eventually you create this very dense, intricate, melodic form. That's kind of what's going on in this type of writing. It's trying to milk the poetry out of every sentence and that kind of thing, and it stylistically, it's great. It's just that, like you say, he doesn't pause to really give you a good clue as to why we're doing this or what's going on or whatever. And it's a shame, because there are some great moments. There's a moment where Wintermute is trying to communicate with Case, and he's ignoring Wintermute. And so as he's walking past a long line of public payphones, and each one of the payphones is ringing as he passes because it's Wintermute trying to hit him at each payphone. That's cool, you know. It makes me think of like Job and Lawnmower Man and that kind of thing.
Well, those scenes are good, but the good thing about that scene is it actually ends and a new chapter begins telling us that there's a big jump in time or a big jump in perspective. And
Yeah,
this is honestly, I think a lot of problems in this story, if you don't want to change the style and the manner upon which he communicated, all an editor had to do was go in there and put in scene breaks and put in section breaks, and that would explain, okay, there's a break in time and there's a break in perspective, or
yeah,
just a break in scene. That would have, okay, great, now I can stop and figure out what was that all about, because between chapters or between a chapter settings, you can go into space. You're like, wait, what? I mean,
yeah.
how did this? When did this? How? Who? And then all of a sudden you're in the Matrix, and oh, is this a beach? Am I seeing a real beach? Is it a beach with? And then you're talking to a cab driver or a guy who pilots a tug, and you're like, are you on the ocean? No. This is a
Yeah.
space tug. Wait a second. What's that? And you're just lost. You half the time you're like, where is this? What is this?
Hmm.
Who's doing what? And
Yeah.
that's every scene of the story,
Yeah.
unfortunately.
Hmm.
And just trying to wrap your head around who's what requires at least a glossary or a redefinition of who's who and what they look like.
Hmm.
Especially when you have characters who are either have their brain formatted
Hmm.
into someone else, another character who can project holograms randomly, and you're like, wait,
Hmm.
are we in the Matrix now, or is this actually a thing?
Hmm. Hmm.
And then you have another character who can jack into another character's body. Well, actually, several people can do that, or several entities can do that,
Hmm.
and then feel what they're feeling, and it's just this combination of technological, and then there's the organic side of drugs, whether you're asleep or not. I mentioned this before, but it's just so confusing as
Hmm.
to who's doing what, when, where, and how, and where you are, and what time has lapsed, and all this other
Yeah.
stuff. It's such a hassle. Like your brain just starts asking all these questions of who's doing what, who knows what, when this is
Hmm.
happening,
Yeah.
and it really breaks the whole experience because these ideas are very interesting. They're very
Hmm.
creative. It's like, wow, this is written in 1984.
Yeah.
This is before, as you said, Ghost in the Shell and Shadowrun and all
Hmm.
other things that. Well, I guess Peter K. Dick with
Blade
Blade
Runner.
Runner, things that were popular at the time. You might have some relation to. So
Hmm.
this was sort of like, as you said, a fountainhead. It wasn't the originator, but it was sort of the bringing these ideas together. And
Hmm.
unfortunately, it didn't really, as a body of work, as its own entity, it didn't really do a very good job. But
Hmm.
it inspired all these other things. Like I would just say, if you want to read a good story about AI coming together and having this conspiracy and what have you, just read Ghost in the Shell. But that's
Yeah.
at least it's
Yeah.
understandable. I'm not saying it's better. I'm just saying
Hmm.
you can understand it better. So
Yeah.
it's just a
Right.
shame. It's just a shame
And
because this is really
yeah.
good. And then I was at the
Yeah.
start. I told you I was like, I love this, and then like halfway through, I'm like, I hate this. What
Yeah. Well, that's the thing, and I mean, of course, the first time I read this, I was like 13, and I'll be honest with you, man. The first time I read it, I didn't know that like half the book is set in outer space. I mean, it's that dense. It's that hard to follow. Yeah, the writing, there is this kind of full immersion feeling in the writing when it clicks, when his writing clicks, it clicks good, man. I mean, it just feels good, and you're in there, and you're in it, and you're sucked into that world. And it's the world that all of us science fiction nerds long to populate, which we already kind of do at this point. But like dark, rain-soaked inner city streets surrounded by neon pipes and noodle shops and everything, and all of that. It's that world, and it's great in that way. But at the same time, it's such a monkey wrench because it's writing. You have to have that acquired that taste for beatnik writing, which even I have, and it can still be very dense to follow. But yeah, I mean, thinking building on what you said, it's kind of like uh, I looked at and I've read the Sprawl trilogy, but the sequel is Count Zero, and Count Zero I've only read once, and that was about 5 years ago, and so I took Count Zero off the shelf and was reading it, and the first thing that happens is there's a character named Turner, and it says they put a slam hound on Turner's trail, and you have to know that a slam hound is this cyborg dog that blows up when it gets to its target, and and so Turner is blown to smithereens, and they salvage enough of his brain that they can keep him conscious, and they regenerate the rest. They spend weeks and weeks regenerating the rest of his body and everything. And then it says something like, well, he spent those weeks in France as a teenager and was occasionally interrupted by the doctor and that sort of thing. And it's this weird thing where it's like, if you're not totally clear on what's happening, they've got his brain logged into this virtual reality kind of Second Life world of France or mid-century France, to keep him entertained while they regenerate his body. That's what's actually going on, and that's tough. It's hard to pick up on that the first time.
Yeah, it's not so much about the style, because I could compare his style to like a conversational style like Raymond Chandler.
Yeah.
Which we sort of get that sort of dark, gritty, noir-esque vibe, and that's fine. It's just the descriptions or the lack thereof, and the connecting sentences to give us a sense of grounding, so that we know where to like what perspective. Like that, I remember that paragraph I sent you. It's like, we know Molly's asleep, and we know that Case entered the building, but we don't know whether Case knows Molly's asleep. And we don't know whether Case actually entered the building or he's in his room at this point. And there's all this sense of movement we don't have. Mm-hmm. It's just sort of, here's a point, here's an idea, here's another point, and now we're doing other things. And it's like, oh, okay. It's like reading a comic book where there's not enough narration.
Yeah.
And if it was visualized like a comic book, we'd get it. Our brain could fill in the blanks, but we don't get the visualization. That's how, it's like reading a Batman. If you love Batman, I love Batman comics. So you read a Batman comic, and it just like skipped a page.
Yeah.
And you're like, oh, Batman's now fighting the Joker. Where did that? Oh, okay. Now he's tied up. And it's like, oh, I wish I knew how he got tied up, or I wish I knew what he's going through. And that's really the fault of the author here, not thinking about his audience. Like, again, you said that people who love science fiction will get into this really well. And at first, it comes off awesome because there's all this color, and then the color sort of fades away, and then we focus on what's the event of the story and the things that are going on. And I had to reread some parts to say, okay, we're in some sort of colony in space, and you said the moon. I didn't even know it was on the moon. Still, I don't. Yeah. And it's a Rastafarian colony. Yeah. And they're all Zionists, which to Rastafarians is a little different than normal Zionism, I think.
Yeah.
And they all want this this utopia-esque world. Mm-hmm. And then your brain starts to figure out, okay, then they have to have some sense of gravity, and even the description of the building they were in at the last conflict didn't make any sense. It was like someone's house, but it was not a real house. It was kind of like a mansion apartment building, but it was shifting, and there were like not dirty, but old things everywhere. And you're like, I still cannot fathom what this thing looks like. So as interesting as these, like, I wouldn't even say interesting. This is so out there, as out there as these ideas are. I would say the average science fiction fan cannot even digest, let alone grasp the world you're in, and that's not because of style. I think the style is fine. It's the lack of detail
Hmm.
within those scenarios. But for a short story, I don't even call it a short story. It's more like a expanded novella. It wasn't too small. It
Hmm.
wasn't too big. But if it had the extra, I wouldn't even give it extra 20 pages tops to fill in some descriptors.
Hmm.
I think the average reader, at least the average sci-fi reader, would go, "Oh,
Hmm.
that's what's going on."
Exactly. Exactly. Yeah. Yeah. It's very. Yeah. It is. It leans far too much on the poetics without really giving you a lot of the meat of it. And like I said, his style. If you by the time he gets around to Virtual Light, he's doing fine. You know, you can read Virtual Light, which Virtual Light was the first Gibson novel I ever read after the Burning Chrome collection. And by the time he gets around to Virtual Light is everything's flowing fine, and he's got his literary structure worked out. So I think Neuromancer. I mean, Neuromancer is. I will still say it is an unbelievably important novel. It is a brilliant novel. It's just hampered by its own. It's weird. It's like it's limited. The ideas are fascinating and broad and unlimited, but the writing style makes it difficult. The writing style is what limits it. So I think that about covers our thoughts on it. Anything else you want to add?
Well, we should probably always say whether we recommend something or not.
Yeah.
I would say no. It's really that bad. Even the only person I could see this appealing to is someone who wants to learn about the history of science fiction or the cyberpunk genre.
Hmm.
Read Philip K. Dick, Zelazny,
Yeah.
those guys before this came out, and then read this, and then you say, okay,
Yeah.
I can see what's going on. And then if you really
Hmm.
want to appreciate those kinds of stories, the '89 version of Shadowrun is totally fine. The soft cover is
Hmm.
great. Ghost in the Shell, the manga's fine. That'll give you a good taste of what it has become as a result of this. So it's more of a timepiece saying yes, this book when it came out, it really had an impact, and it's not so much a classic in the sense of whether it's a book you want to read again and again and to get more out of it, but as an inspiration for books that came out that were clearer and I would say more entertaining to read.
Hmm. Yeah. Yeah. Uh, Absolutely. And I would say I would recommend it with the caveat of read Burning Chrome first. The Burning Chrome short story collection. That's almost like a mission statement. That book, like that's where it's short stories. So you're focused. Each story is focused on a more specific idea. One specific thing, like Johnny Mnemonic, which is arguably his most famous short story, and they made it into the movie and everything. Johnny Mnemonic is about a data courier. It's somebody that can store data in his head, and he's trying to get this data out of his head before it ruptures his implant. And that's one idea, and we can wrap our heads around it. There's one story in that collection that's devoted entirely to the concept of what cyberpunk is. It's about a guy who is it's literally about a guy who is giving up or losing interest in the pristine, beautiful utopian future espoused by post World War II era science fiction, and embracing the grittiness and the dirt of the real life, the modern world. And it's like and the technology that goes along with it. And so it's like that's almost like a dramatized mission statement for what Gibson's trying to do. Burning Chrome, the story, they talk about, they actually explain a lot of the terminology that he's using. And it's almost like he's expecting you to have done your homework and read Burning Chrome first, but how would you have known that? But then in Burning Chrome, that's where it's explained, where we find out that, cutting the ice refers to computer hackers working their way through the firewalls, the security systems in a corporate computer database and that kind of thing. So we start to learn what these terms mean. But you're right. I mean, if you haven't been going through and compiling an absolute glossary of terms as you go, you're going to be hopelessly lost. So, anyway, I think that about wraps it up. Um, So for Stefan D. Iorio, I'm Jordan Owen. This has been Book Talk. Please join us next time on Book Talk when our book will be Breakfast at Tiffany's by Truman Capote.